Everybody, why don't we go ahead and jump and say the pledge? Ready? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Well, look, today we're going to wrap up the discussion from the early Greek history and how it applies today and talk about some balance of power and things. We'll also, too, tell you that we've got, people are turning in their research papers, but this concludes, too, the lecture on that whole Greek phase and all those definitions and things. So that study guide's been posted. I'll show that to you right now. Let's go ahead and take a look if I can find it really fast. Okay, so here we go. Let me share the screen. And there we go. So the lecture we're doing right now is the one I'm recording for this little part 3. And there's a lot of little lectures in there, but a lot of them overlap and we do repeat most of the definitions. So you should be able to find them. Some of them you can just look up, just Google them. And that would be good too. But then there's some essay things in there and so on. So it's a pretty healthy, robust study guide. And that will go live, well, the study guide's ready now. And after this lecture, we'll have all the lectures in, and including one question we're gonna be talking about today is the filibuster, right? So that's kind of important. But before we get going on that, let's take a quick look at the president's first news conference. And this is always an important event. And it's interesting, he made some news. Apparently, they think they can get 200 million doses into people's arms, which means 400 million doses will have been administered, under this plan. So he doubled the goal, basically. So things are working really well there. He also suggested he's probably going to run for president again. So he left that open. Which is fascinating. And he just did a great job in his first news conference. Lots of questions, lots of things going on. Interestingly, not a lot of questions about COVID. It's like, okay, you got this handled. Okay, let's move on to some of the other big pressing issues, including, and you'll hear in this, something about the filibuster. Okay, so the filibuster is a Senate rule, and it's not in the Constitution. It's just the senators themselves voting to say we're not going to pass any law unless we get 60% of senators on board. That means not a lot of things can get done. And so will they keep that rule in place? It's been in place for like 100 years in some form or another. Who knows? But they didn't use the filibuster to pass Joe Biden's $1.9 trillion recovery plan, which you guys are writing really well about, honestly, on those research papers. Well, you're doing a good job with that question. But at any rate, will they keep the filibuster in place for the voting rights bill? Because it only takes 41 senators to block it. And it looks like Democrats want to expand voting rights, whereas Republicans want to restrict them in terms of for security reasons and all that. So it looks like the parties are split. So if they're going to get the voting rights law through, they got to get rid of the filibuster, at least for that vote, and others too, including gun legislation, working their way through the House. House has already passed 2 bills making, filling loopholes and things like that in our gun laws. And since we've had 2 mass shootings in just the last 2 weeks, this has become again a national issue. So that is another one. If the filibuster's in place, nothing happens. If the filibuster is removed, then the Democrats can move through legislation on guns. So another one that the filibuster is important for is, should DC become a state, District of Columbia? They have more people live in DC than live in Vermont or Wyoming, and yet Wyoming has 2 senators and 1 member of the House, and the people in DC do not. Puerto Rico, same way. They actually have more people than 5 or 6 states, and yet they don't have senators or congressmen. So if that's going to happen, the filibuster rule has to go away. However, Republicans got rid of the filibuster when it came to filling judges. So it's not without precedent. Okay, so filibuster, look it up. You have a little short essay at the bottom there. that I need your thoughts on. And so this is kind of your first introduction into that filibuster rule, but it's really important whether or not certain things are going to pass or not. Okay, so it's the most important thing we're talking about today is the filibuster.
We'll be watching
okay,
out.
Here we go.
Thank you. President Biden held his first formal news conference today, doubling down on how many vaccine shots he now expects in the first 100 days in office. But two other issues dominated today: immigration and how far the president is willing to go to push the Senate to see through his agenda. Kristen Welker was in the news conference.
At his first press conference since taking office, President Biden laying out a new target for COVID vaccinations, 200 million shots in his first 100 days.
I know it's ambitious, twice our original goal, but no other country in the world has even come close, not even close to what we're doing. I believe we can do it.
But with more than 130 million shots already administered, the U.S. is on pace to beat that benchmark. Still, administration officials stress hitting that target will require vaccinating people in hard-to-reach communities quickly. The president faced a flurry of questions about some of the most pressing issues, including the surge of migrants at the southern border.
I guess I should be flattered. People are coming because I'm the nice guy. It happens every single solitary year.
But his own DHS secretary says the administration is bracing for a surge not seen in 20 years, with nearly 5,000 children currently being held at border facilities, most longer than the law allows.
The idea that I'm going to say, which I would never do, that if an unaccompanied child ends up at the border, we're just going to let them starve to death and stay on the other side. No previous administration did that either, except Trump. I'm not going to do it.
And while the administration let our cameras into one detention center, we pressed the president. When will the public see what is happening at the centers that are overcrowded? Will you commit to transparency on this?
I will commit to transparency. And as soon as I am in a position to be able to implement what we're doing right now. So this is being set up, and you'll have full access to everything once we get this thing moving.
President Biden reversed some controversial Trump-era policies on his first day in office, including scrapping one that mandated migrants wait in Mexico while their asylum claims are processed. Tonight, insisting he has no regrets. Did you move too quickly to roll back some of the executive orders of your predecessor?
First of all the policies are underway. We're not helping at all. I make no apologies for that.
Mr. Biden, who has an ambitious agenda from new gun restrictions to immigration reform and climate change, left the door open to getting rid of the filibuster, which requires a 60-vote margin in the Senate to pass bills.
And if we have to, if there's complete lockdown and chaos as a consequence of the filibuster, then we'll have to go beyond what I'm talking about.
The president flashing anger when asked about Republican efforts to limit voting rights.
What I'm worried about is how un-American this whole initiative is. It's sick. It's sick.
And Mr. Biden, who is the oldest president in history at 78, swatting away questions about whether he plans to seek re-election.
You haven't set up a re-election campaign yet, as your predecessor had by this time.
My predecessor needed to. My predecessor. Oh, God, I miss him. No, the answer is yes. My plan is to run for re-election. That's my expectation.
Kristen, I know you also.
Okay, so that was a pretty revealing news conference, and they're always important events, and a lot of news made there, but a lot that will help your research paper. I think his attitude about young children at the border might help you with that third essay. Also, to the whole idea around the COVID now is like I said, people aren't asking him, hey, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? Because they know what he's doing. The job is getting done there. Let's see how America's responding. However, this is something that when you write your paper, we have a half a dozen papers already in. Those people did a great job. Every question that they answered, they did well. So everybody got full credit. One student just did one of the four, and this person did a great job on that question. And I think it was just like, am I doing this right? Okay. And I wrote an email, said, yeah, you're doing it right. Go ahead and work on the other 3. And that's a good strategy, but it still have to get everything, all 4 of them done by April 1st. And if you miss the April 1st deadline, guys, you know, as we talked about yesterday, it's a hard and fast deadline. A student wrote me, but can I turn it in a few days late? And said, no, you cannot. If I don't get them by that time period, I do not have the time to turn them around to you, get you to fix them and get them back in, resubmitting by May 1st. It's just an impossibility. So if you want help, I'm happy to give it, but it's got to be done by that date. Look at this. We're in an uptick now. Basically, people, you know, quit wearing masks. We just, you know, since the vaccine started rolling out and whatever, people are saying, oh, we're through this thing, whatever. We're not. We're at a high plateau. Look at Brazil. Brazil's hospitals are wildly overrun right now. They're going to pay a big price for their laissez-faire attitude about mask wearing and about social distancing. And we've got to double down. Let's go ahead and look at this. If we plateau at 64,000, that's where we were back when this big surge started again. And people think, well, we got the vaccine. Yeah, but we got to get to herd immunity, as I talked about last time. Utah, let's take a look, see if we've improved a little bit. That's at 14%. Yes, we have. That's fantastic news. We got to get over 2.5 million Utahns vaccinated or have had the illness and got through it to get to herd immunity. And until we get to that, 14% isn't there. That's not where we need to be. We got to get to 65%, 70% to protect everyone. And then you know, luckily, we're doing a much better job in the hospitals and that saving people's lives. So that death rate's dropped a bit, which is fantastic news. Utah, once again, you have to put the updated data in your report. When you turn it in, I will know what the data is up to that point. And so I will not hold you accountable for what happens in the future, but only the data, the facts that are present at the time you submit. And Utah, 23%. Boy, that's about 2% since yesterday, 2 days ago. And now it's like, are we head Idaho? Darn. Texas, head of them, 22, 29. Yeah, we are. We're head to Texas now. Okay, so that's good news. But look, let's get down to New Mexico. They're taking it seriously down there, 34%. Yeah, it's just California, 27. Their state's doing a better job, and we can do a better job too. But we can't give up till the fight's over, because this is the scary part, is we plateaued, now heading back up again. And until we get to herd immunity, a lot of people are going to get sick. Okay, so enough of that. Make sure you get your updated data in there. Let's get back to this filibuster discussion. What's triggered all this is that we've had, during COVID, we just went a year without these mass shootings. But before COVID, it was just, and it all started in a little high school in Columbine, Colorado. 2 kids decided they just hated the world and dressed up as Matrix characters with guns underneath their big long coats, whatever, just walked into school and just shot everybody up. And there's been now since then so many copycats of that Columbine massacre. And it's like 114 cents, something like that. Well, they'll tell you. I think I better not say until I see the data here myself. But let's go ahead and play this. And this is what's leading to the idea that we might need to make it safer on the gun issue. So let's go ahead and look at this right here. We go.
Of course, won't erase the pain for the families of the 10 people killed in Monday's Colorado supermarket rampage. Yet we are driven to understand and learn more about the suspect. Maybe the clues are in the troubled history of the man now charged with the murders, a history of violence that has emerged as police try to learn about what led up to the mass shooting. Meantime, in what is now a familiar ritual of such wanton attacks, the political debate over gun control back in the open tonight. The Biden administration calling for new gun laws. gun rights defenders opposing. The question this time, however, how far can Democrats stretch their slimmest of majorities in Congress to make this time different? Let's get to it all. Let's start with Aaron McLaughlin in Boulder.
Tonight, a community paying tribute to a local hero, lining the streets in honor of fallen officer Eric Talley, the first to arrive on the scene of Monday's deadly attack. As the community pulls together, new details are emerging of the suspected shooter's disturbing past.
Look,
Though we still don't know why 21-year-old Ahmad Alissa opened fire on this supermarket, claiming 10 innocent lives. His neighbor describing the moment investigators arrived to search the suspect's home.
We heard the bullhorn. Out of the house, everybody out of the house.
Authorities say he had a history of violence and mental problems. Angel Hernandez and Taylor Williams were his classmates. They say he was bullied in school.
They would just make fun of his last name. They would make terrorist jokes.
In 2018, Alissa pled guilty to assaulting a classmate whom he told officials bullied him weeks earlier. In 2019, he posted to social media claiming racist and Islamophobic people were hacking his phone. Both he and his older brother were known to the FBI. Two law enforcement officials tell NBC News there's no immediate signs of radicalization as a motive.
It would be premature for us to draw any conclusions at this point in time.
It's also unclear why the suspect chose the King Soopers grocery store, a 30-minute drive from his home, and if he had any connection to the victims.
Ricky was kind of the light of our family.
25-year-old Ricky Olds was killed in the attack, as was Terry Leiker, 51, who had worked at King Soopers for nearly 30 years. Lynn Murray was a 62-year-old mother of two.
She was so beautiful. She was my favorite person. I would tell her all the time, you're my favorite person. She was the best.
Last night, her husband John and her daughter Olivia visited the growing makeshift memorial outside the supermarket.
It put an enormous smile in my heart last night at a difficult time.
Tonight, this close-knit community vowing to never forget. The suspect is expected to appear before a judge tomorrow morning. He's facing 10 counts of first-degree murder. It will be his first appearance in what the district attorney expects to be a lengthy process. Lester?
Aaron McLaughlin tonight. Thank you. And the White House is making a new call.
Okay, so let's listen to this bit.
To action on gun safety, but also facing criticism from both sides of the gun debate for trying to go too far and not going fast enough. Here's Kristen Welker.
In the wake of two mass shootings within a week, the Biden White House intensifying its calls for new gun legislation after the House passed two bills that would expand background checks. Vice President Harris now urging the Senate to take action.
Stop with the false choices. This is not about getting rid of the Second Amendment. It's simply about saying we need reasonable gun safety laws.
Democrats would need at least 10 Republican senators to pass those bills, but Republicans are opposed, arguing stiffer gun laws would violate Americans' Second Amendment rights.
Unfortunately, when it comes to gun violence, we see Democrats playing political games. We see Democrats targeting law-abiding citizens.
As a candidate, Mr. Biden promised to introduce new gun legislation on day one, but he still hasn't. The White House deflecting criticism.
This has been a passion of his, putting in place gun safety measures throughout his career.
It has become an all too familiar ritual, a mass shooting followed by calls for new gun laws that go nowhere, including after the Sandy Hook massacre, which claimed the lives of 20 elementary school children. Mark Barden lost his 7-year-old son, Daniel, in that horrific shooting.
What is your level of optimism that Congress will pass new gun legislation now when they haven't in the past?
Kristen, I have to remain hopeful. I will never give up advocating for common sense solutions. And there are many solutions available to us that will save lives.
All of it shining a light on the debate over whether Democrats should get rid of the filibuster, which requires a 60-vote threshold to pass most legislation, with the latest standoff over gun safety hanging in the balance.
Kristen is with us now.
Okay, so there you get a good idea of the discussion and the debate around the filibuster and one of the hot button issues in American history. And that is, gun safety, gun violence, that kind of thing. So there's a little question on the filibuster for you to answer in this last study guide. And let's see what your thoughts are there. Okay. All right, cool. Well, listen, let me go ahead and get started now with the last little piece of this lecture on where we're pulling from Greek history. We're pulling into more modern history, talking about the balance of power. And so let's go ahead and jump into that. Okay, so we've got two key moments that we want to talk about that changed the balance of power. Now, the interesting thing is World War I didn't change the balance of power. World War I actually simply reaffirmed the current balance of power at the time. That was the preeminence of the British Empire, which had 130 years of being number one at the top, and the French Empire, which was pretty close to it, but not quite to that level. And those two powers, with the help of the United States and all the countries in the British Empire, Canada and South Africa and Australia and India and so on, were able to stop the new rising power. And the new rising power that was stopped was Germany. But Germany had destroyed Russia. And Russia fell into civil war. The Bolshevik communists took over that country in a coup, familiar term, right? And then they created the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. And as I said last time, a lot of people misunderstand the Soviet Union. You know, we were so caught up in our own propaganda that we believed all of our own lies, that they couldn't do anything right, they were totally inept and all this kind of stuff. If they were that inept, how did they go from an agricultural, backwards, medieval country to a power able to create the weapons of war needed to defeat the Nazis 20 years later? Look, say what you want, they won World War II by dismantling some 90% of the Nazi military. Now, let's go ahead and take a quick look at what they were up against. What they're up against is this massive assault of one of the finest armies that was ever put together by Adolf Hitler in the history of the world. And yet they were able to absorb the attack, use their geography and climate against the Germans, and then create tanks like you wouldn't believe. And they were willing to sacrifice literally waves of men if necessary, like at the Battle of Stalingrad, in order to keep the Germans out of the motherland, Mother Russia. You know, so this massive thing is still celebrated every year. You know, the great victory over the Nazis by the Soviet Union, even though now it's Russia. A lot of Americans didn't understand how successful they were going to be after the Battle of Stalingrad. Most people assumed, right, that the Nazis hate the communists and the communists hate the Nazis, and so they were just going to destroy each other. Well, in large part, that's really what happened, except not really, because starting with the Battle of Stalingrad, the Soviet Union and their forces started to win. After 2 years of being beaten badly, they started to win, and their military became the most formidable military on land in the world. They literally rolled over the Germans. We, of course, landed in France with the British and some other allied forces like Canadians and so on. And we were able then to liberate France and push into Germany. But, you know, we didn't take nearly the casualties. All of the premier units of the Soviet, of the Nazi army were defeated really by Russia, Soviet Union. So, wow, okay. And then, of course, that created an empire, this vast empire. The Soviet Union then grew, let's show you this map. All of these countries had been independent, and now they're controlled by the Soviet Union. They expanded beyond anybody's wildest imagination that this could ever happen. Half of Europe. They could have taken all of Europe had it not been for the other power that rose up in 1941. Now, this power was more of a seagoing power, And we talked about the power of seagoing. The United States created an unbelievable Navy. We had to have an unbelievable Navy in order to take on Japan. We were creating more ships than anybody had ever created in history, more aircraft carriers than ever created in history. And to this day, we still have the #1 most preeminent, powerful Navy in the world, period, ever. Surpassing the British Navy, leaving them in the dust. But we also had some land forces too. So we're a little bit like Athens here, superior in the Navy, but Russia, Soviet Union, was the lion. So the shark and the lion, how do you attack each other? The only reason the Soviet Union stopped here and didn't take all of Germany and maybe more big chunks of Europe was because of our nuclear capability that we developed. The 2 nuclear bombs we dropped on Japan, we threatened Russia with those. If you advance further, see, our military, as good as it was, would not have stood up to them. We just didn't have the numerical strength. We just didn't have the capacity to stop them. General Patton once said famously, why don't we just rearm the Germans and get the Germans' army with our army or whatever and go against the Soviet Union right now? Of course, he died accidentally and so on, and nothing came of that plan. But the truth of the matter is, if the Germans couldn't stop him, nobody else was going to. And so on land, but on the sea, different story. And in the air, different story. The United States emerged with the #1, well, we even created a new Air Force. It was the Army Air Corps, but we had the most dominant Air Force on the planet, which gave us some advantages. So dominant sea power, dominant air power, but the Soviet Union, because they're a land-based empire, had a larger military. So how do you offset that? Well, in some ways, Patton's plan actually became part of the plan. Let's take Western Europe, rebuild it after all the destruction of World War II. Get it involved in our economic system again. Let's rebuild their economies so they're not tempted to look at communism as a solution. And it worked. It was a thing called, very important that you know this, the Marshall Plan. And the Marshall Plan, we took American dollars, billions in today's standards. We basically did a European recovery plan, just like we're doing a recovery plan for the United States right now. We did this for Europe to rebuild them so that they would have the economy necessary to help us stand up against the advance of the Soviet Union. And this is the beginning of the Cold War. When we create the North Atlantic Treaty Organization as a Delian League type organization to offset this power here, this land power, think Sparta, Athens versus Sparta, right? One's a naval power, air power, another one's a land power. Now, what the Soviet Union will do though, is they will then create rocket technology, the best. That's what the space program was really all about. The space program wasn't about getting to the moon or an orbiting space station. It was about experimenting and creating the capability to launch intercontinental ballistic nuclear missiles to annihilate your opponent without having to worry about a Navy or an Air Force. It was a leapfrog in technology. And we had to catch up to that. And we did, but we were able to catch up. But by the same token, that's what creates the dynamic of the Cold War. And when you look at all of these countries that were under the domination of the Soviet Union for 47 years, wow, the Soviet Empire. But where is it written that the Soviet Empire goes on forever? Well, it's not written anywhere, because what happened is you have to have 3 components of power. Let me get back to the list really fast. Here we go. Sorry, I should put a copy up later in the lecture, but diplomatic power. They didn't really have diplomatic power. They basically took over countries and forced them to do what they wanted them to do. Whereas NATO showed the United States replaced England, replaced France as the diplomatic power, and we got all these other countries in our Delian League, NATO, and the United Nations, and other international organizations that we put together in the post-war world to expand capitalism, to expand democracy, and to defend ourselves against the Soviet Union in the Cold War. We had the diplomatic power and we had the economic power. Let's be honest, communism doesn't produce as much wealth as capitalism would do. And as a result, the Soviet Union they had some diplomatic power after a while. Their economic power, they couldn't keep up economically, but militarily, they're still, even to this day, extremely, extremely strong. Okay, but we had all three components. And that would lead to a policy called containment. Let me go ahead and show you this map again. The policy of the United States for 47 years was, let's just keep them from growing any further. Let's stop them from growing any further. And this China, by the way, turned communist too. So we had both countries to worry about. But it led us to war in Korea. It led us to war in Vietnam as strictly trying to contain the virus, because we couldn't win a war in Asia. I don't care how good your Navy is. I don't care how good your Air Force is. You're not going to win a land war in Russia, and you're not going to win a land war in China. We can't even win a land war in Afghanistan. There are limits to power, but we kept the pressure on, and for 47 years, it worked. So two great powers emerged out of World War II, the Soviet Union and the United States, replacing the former powers of France, England especially, and even Japan and Germany to an extent. So we had what we call a bipolar world, two powers balancing off against each other in this massive Cold War, which the United States won. Now, we didn't jump on the tables and start celebrating this. The president that was president at the time was George H.W. Bush. He wasn't going to gloat. He didn't want forces inside the Soviet Union to do crazy things, so he didn't make a big deal of it. But that was one of the great achievements in world history, was the defeat of the Soviet Empire. All of these countries you see right here broke away and are now independent countries, leaving Russia a shell of itself. It's like half the population it used to be, right? But they still want to be a major power, but they're like the 12th or 14th biggest economy in the world. They're not even in the top 10 of economies in the world. Meanwhile, the United States was like Athens of old, controlling world trade, controlling, by the way, after the war, 50% of all the manufactured goods in the world were made here in the United States. This was a time when any American who wanted a job could go down to any factory and make a ton of money. I'm not talking about minimum wage here. I'm talking about equivalent today of $50 and $60 and $70 an hour. America was at the top. But the question is, where is it written that the American empire goes on forever? The truth of the matter is, the world is caught up. Where we were 50% of the world's manufacturing at the end of World War II, we're now a fraction of that. Why? The world's caught up. The world's not going to sit back. 8 billion people aren't going to sit back and let 4.25% of the world's population determine the economic policies of their countries. And China has always had a great economy, and I'll play this again. I think I did play this before for you, but throughout history, China has always been a major player. They've gone through these periods of like almost a country-like thing. Then they break into warlordism and civil war, and then they go back to empire. You see this, we're in time of Athens here. We're in time of Rome here with the Han Dynasty. Roman Empire still with the three kingdoms, Qing Dynasty, the fall of Rome. And we're going now into the Middle Ages. China's always been a thing. When Columbus set sail in 1492, he was trying to get to China. Why? Because that's where all the good stuff was made. China and India were the great economic powers of the ancient world. And they grew. Look at the Qing Dynasty in 1300. Look at the Ming Dynasty in 1410. Look at the Qin Dynasty in 1820. But after 1820, the Europeans dominated. And China fell into second-class status as a world economy, despite their huge population. Now, of course, they wanted to get out of that. And they tried different things, including communism, for about 20 years. It didn't work. It led to starvation. It led to millions of people dying. It didn't work. So they abandoned it. And they abandoned it starting in 1972. And so what we see starting in 1972 in China and 1991 in Soviet Union is communism dies. It doesn't exist anymore. As a system, it was a complete and total failure. There are no communists in the world today, except maybe North Korea. The truth of the matter is, when Americans say, we don't want to be communist, nobody does. It is not a thing. It failed colossally around the world. It couldn't produce the wealth necessary to keep world powers powerful. So they changed their economic systems. China knew that you need three elements of power, just like we know that. You need economic power, military power, and soft diplomatic power. And China with communism wasn't producing the economy necessary to achieve the other two. The Soviet Union, when it broke apart, why did it break apart? Its economy collapsed. It couldn't afford its military anymore. I had friends who were generals who went to Russia when we had some peace treaties and were doing, observations of each other's military, make sure we're obeying the rules of a treaty we passed. And he said they'd had no spare parts. If we'd have gotten into a war with them, they would have been fine for the first 2 or 3 days, but after that, they had no spare parts left. They just didn't even have enough tires for their aircraft to, land their planes. So it takes the three elements of power. We maintained it: economic, military, and soft power through 1991. China, I remember traveling to China in the 1980s. They were the most capitalist place I'd ever seen in southern China. There were businesses everywhere. They were doing capitalism better than we do in many ways. They were then becoming the biggest manufacturing power in the world. So when you hear people saying, we got to stop this person because they're going to be a communist, there's no communism. Nobody ever wants communism. And socialism is not communism, by the way. They're very different things. And a lot of Americans don't know that. Now, America, of course, has this tendency to hide behind its own walls. It's called isolationism. It's been a thing throughout our history. Very seldom do Americans want to get involved internationally, right, as an instinct. But it's really important that we do. We need to be part of the World Health Organization because we need to get advance notice on viruses, and we need to work with the world on vaccines. Look, the vaccines were created by international companies, not American companies, not British companies, not German companies, but companies that are capitalist that work around the world. Capitalism knows no boundaries, knows no country. Capitalists go where the money is. And if the money's in vaccines, you get a couple of scientists from Turkey living in Germany. They create this vaccine. They sell it to Pfizer. Pfizer then produces it around the world. Why is the United States leading the world in vaccination? Because we have more money right now. We're spending more. We're spending $20 a dose. Some countries are trying to pay $18 and they're not getting enough doses. Somehow we got to balance that out. But the United States' power now, economically, has now been in decline since about 1972, relative to the other countries. It's not that our economy stopped growing, it kept growing, but not at the same pace. China's economy started to grow at 8, 10, 12, 14%, while we grew at a very nice, comfortable 3 or 4%. That's a nice rate, 2, 3, 4%. But China was going from agricultural backwards country to become the biggest industrial power on the planet. Germany completely rebounded. They got together with 27 other countries in Europe and created the European Union, which gives them more economic power. So in a sense, they've created their own economic Delian League in Europe called the European Union. They unified their currency into the euro instead of having different currencies for every country. It's more efficient to have one currency. And so by the time we get to 2016, the leadership of the world, see, the US president used to be called the leader of the free world because of what we did with NATO and the UN and all that. That went away. People starting in 2016 started to look to Angela Merkel, the leader of Germany, as the leader of the free world. Now, I find that very ironic considering what happened in 1945. But nevertheless, this is kind of where the world's heading. Why? Because the European Union has about 500 to 600 million people, and we have about half that many. You need scale to succeed in the future economies. You got to have a lot of workers. You got to have a lot of people buying products and whatever. And China and India look destined to be the new 1 and 2. Now, let's talk about soft power. China is exercising soft economic power around the world. They are now contributing to the economies of all these different countries and donating money to them. In one country, I think Tanzania, they said, look, if you'll help us get these certain minerals and things that we need for our economy, for Chinese economy, we will pave every road in your country because we know you can't afford it, but we can afford it. So we'll pave all your roads for you in exchange for good trade relationships with these particular minerals that come out of your country. They're doing this all over the world. They're doing it in Afghanistan. They're doing it in Mongolia. They're doing it in Laos. They're doing it in the Americas. Their investment overseas into other countries, and they're reaching out to those countries, offering them help and aid. They have actually loaded plane after plane after plane and sent it to Africa to vaccinate people from COVID in Africa at their own expense. The United States is going to start doing that too. If we get extra doses, we're going to start offering them to Mexico and to Canada and other countries that may be behind us. But look at this soft power. They are now a huge economic power. They have a very big military. They have more men in their army than we do. They have nuclear technology. They have missile technology. They don't have much of a navy, but they're working on that. And so here is the story of your generation. The United States, once the #1 preeminent power in the world, wins the Cold War, defeats the Soviet Union, but then relative to other countries, goes into economic decline relative. That doesn't mean we stop growing, but we don't grow as fast. Look at what happened with China. China was behind Germany, France, and the United Kingdom in their economy. By 2005, they had caught up with France. By 2006, they caught up with England. By 2007, they catch up to Germany. And then the massive economy of Japan is huge. They catch up to them in 2009. When did they catch up to us? 2014. In 2014, the Chinese economy surpassed ours. We have a group called the middle class. It's about 150 million Americans that are in the middle class. We have a small 1% or so in the upper class, and then we have some people, most of Americans are in the middle or in the bottom. They have 350 million people in the middle class in China. They have 1.5 billion people, so they have a lot of people from agricultural areas that are looking for work in factories and whatever. Their economy, as far as manufacturing, has just become #1. Most of the products you use, all your computers, your iPhone, all of that, made in China. China has become the manufacturing center. They have become what the United States was in 1945. And so here we have a situation where this is the crossover point, where the United States, $17 trillion economy, they hit 18 trillion. By the time we get today, they're about 30 trillion and we're about 23 trillion. This is still a great economy. There's no question about that, but it's now #2. So the United States now economically is #2. Diplomatically, we've struggled in the last 4 years or so and basically didn't do diplomacy for a while. Biden's got to restore that if we're going to have the soft power that we used to enjoy. But right now, people are looking at our efforts with the vaccine and say, are these guys leaders or not? So the United States now is in danger of the end of the American century. How long did the American century last? Well, it could have lasted until 2016, depending on what Biden can do. That may be the end of the American century. When the history books 100 years from now look back, they'll say America's great one started at Pearl Harbor. And the biggest achievement was winning the Cold War, and then they plateaued. And other countries who have much bigger populations caught up. And India could pass our economy within the next 10 years too. Brazil's on a roll, despite their problems with COVID right now. And the European Union is twice our population. And let me tell you, the Europeans are wicked, wicked smart and extremely well educated. They're better educated than we are. Europeans have a better education system than we do. The Chinese education system is awesome. And India has like the #1 tech university in the world. 100,000 students apply for about 2,000 slots every year. So for the United States to continue into the future, we've got to figure out how to do it. And that's going to be the big challenge of your generation. If the American century is over, then what place in the world does America still have? And is that where we want to be? And that's the kind of things that you guys need to be thinking about, because you can just hear from this explanation a final essay coming your way. All right. So, once you get research paper and everything else, we have to have a study guide there at the end. And the question is, I think we already put this in this study guide. Have we reached the end of the American century? Where is it written that the American empire goes on forever? And if we want to continue the role that we've been on since 1941, what have we got to do to continue that? What are the things we have to do to continue to be one of the top countries in the world? It's an important question. And it's really the question that we have for every election coming forward. It's, can our Congress, can our system of government continue to lead the world instead of follow? And that is, like I said, I think a wonderful, wonderful essay question. So yeah, be thinking about that one. All right. And let's have a nice debate and discussion about when I get back. I will see you guys definitely on Monday. So, well, for you guys, it'd be Tuesday. So looking forward to that. And we can have some nice discussions and debate, including maybe talk about this one. And certainly I want to hear your ideas on the filibuster in this next study guide. All right, well, that's kind of where I want to stop it. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stop the share right now, and let's stop the recording.